While there are tons of performance SUVs available today, Mercedes-AMG really pioneered this segment in the 1990s. And now we're looking at one of their latest and greatest offerings with this, the 2021 Mercedes-AMG GLE63 4MATIC. And as you might have noticed by now, this is the coupe variant with the slopey roof. Now, I've been driving this ultra powerful SUV for about a week or so, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. So I'm gonna give you a full tour around it. We're gonna take it out for a spin. But before we do any of that, I wanna make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel because it helps us out a ton. Now, if you've seen any brand new AMG model, then you will have likely already seen this face somewhere else. And I mean that because a lot of the brand new AMG models have the same exact combination of the big Mercedes badge, the Panamericana grille with the vertical slats, and the bigger, lower intakes. Now, in this particular case, all of those elements are much larger because this is, remember, this is a full-size SUV, so there's a lot of surface area to cover. And for the most part, I like the fact that everything kind of smoothly transitions from the headlights to the intakes to the grille. There aren't any two like overly sharp lines that will really date this design. And I like the fact that it just sort of flows, but it still remains very, very aggressive. And it gives the GLE a good amount of road presence. Now, when looking at the sides of the GLE63, you're gonna notice the first of a couple of optional extras, and I'm talking about these 22-inch wheels. I love this black spoke design. It's actually my favorite AMG wheel design that they are currently producing. And up front you're getting 285, 40, 22-inch tires. In the back you're getting 3 25, 35, 22. So there's a lot of rubber going on there, and that actually, even though you have a upside in terms of grip, there is a downside that we'll cover in the driving section. But for the most part, I can't get over how good these wheels look. And additionally, you have these massive brakes that are finished in red. And given the fact that this is a gray SUV with black wheels, having that pop of red really gives it that sort of sporty edge that you otherwise wouldn't get if they were just black brakes. Now, if I'm completely honest, I dislike about 99.9% of all of these sort of coupe styled SUVs, but this is the 0.1%. And I say that because, you know, this is the second generation of the coupe style GLE, and I feel like it's so much better than the first iteration. Now, structurally, they're very similar, but in terms of the tail lights, the way it's kind of swoops up with this little spoiler here, the gloss black exhaust tips, this gloss black diffuser, it all ties in to create a very sort of sporty aesthetic. And I like that the transition of the slopey roof is a little smoother. So for the most part, I don't like pretty much all of them, but except this one. This one has kind of really managed to win me over. And I just like the fact that no matter kind of what angle you're looking at this thing, it just sort of looks sort of big and muscular, and it really carries that presence throughout. Now, since this is an AMG, let's talk about what's under the hood, because here we have a 4-liter twin turbocharged V8 engine, but that's sort of not all there is to this story, because this GLE63 has something called EQ Boost. And the best way I can explain it is, think of it, it's a mild hybrid system that is sandwiched in between the transmission and the engine, and it essentially replaces the alternator and the starter. Now, the benefit of this mild hybrid system is that it really does fill in extra torque to sort of make things smoother. It's not that it makes it overall faster or gives you more power. It's just to really smoothen things up. Now, this engine, when you're in your comfort mode, it does have cylinder deactivation for greater efficiency on the highway. Now, what that EQ Boost does is when you're transitioning between 4 to 8 cylinders, it really sort of bridges that gap so it can be smooth. And there's something very interesting, at least on the road, and we'll talk about that in a second, is just how responsive this engine can really be as a result of that EQ Boost. And it actually helps the start-stop system. So when you're really at a stoplight and you kind of want to go, you don't have to kind of have that jarring feeling of the engine turning on and then go. It's sort of very, very smooth. It's without a doubt the best start-stop system I've ever used. Now, but again, most of that torque coming from this engine comes in at around 2600 RPM. So when you put your foot down, it really, really does take off. And remember, it's 600 horsepower, 627 pounds-feet of torque, which is a lot. even in a big shell such as this. Now, all of that power is routed to all four wheels via a 9-speed automatic transmission, but that all-wheel drive system is rear drive biased, so for the most part when you're driving around, it really does feel like a big, powerful rear-wheel drive SUV, but when you floor it, you basically get absolutely no wheel spin, just speed. Now, in terms of the interior layout, we're looking at a couple of very familiar AMG elements, and I'm talking about this steering wheel. Now, there's a couple of optional extras here, and this steering wheel is an optional extra because it does have the carbon fiber pack. Now, that's around $1,700 extra, but you get a ton of carbon fiber trim. And one thing I really like about the steering wheel is the fact that you're either gripping Alcantara or carbon fiber, two very premium materials, and that carries on to the rest of the cabin as well. Everything you touch in here feels very premium, even in comparison to a standard GLE or the slightly cheaper GLE63 model. Now, in front of the driver, you have two 12.3-inch screens. They're held within the same bezel, so they almost look like the same exact screen. Now, you do get your Apple CarPlay, your Android Auto, but Mercedes' MBUX system is so good, and just sort of the aesthetics of it are so strong that you're probably not going to use those smartphone-based systems. Now, in terms of audio, we do have upgraded Burmeister audio, which is great. The overall interior quality of all the materials, the seats, they're finished in Napa leather, just everything in here feels so premium. And even some of the little plastic bits, they've been so cleverly finished and disguised that you really aren't going to feel like your six-figure SUV has any real cheap elements inside of it. Now, as you've likely already noticed, the GLE63 isn't exactly like a lot of the other cars we get to test here on the channel, which are mainly more mass market daily driver types of vehicles. And the reason I bring that up is because the GLE63 has a very unique role that it needs to play, and that's because it needs to be an SUV for every day, but it also needs to almost perform like a sports car when you want it. Now, it definitely has all of the right equipment to play that part. So a quick refresher, remember we have a 4-liter twin-turbo V8 under the hood with EQ boost, developing 603 horsepower and 627 pounds-feet of torque. Now, I'll admit, while I really find the fact that, you know, Mercedes and other big car makers are making ultra-fast SUVs such as this a great thing, and you know, more horsepower is always great in my book, but I don't typically get super excited for them because for the most part, a lot of the SUVs in the segment, yeah, they're really, really fast in a straight line, but if you want them to handle, they kind of begin to fall apart a little bit in that department. And if I had to sum up my time with the GLE63, is that it has done a fantastic job at changing my mind. And I mean that because this SUV, despite its enormous size and, you know, a higher center of gravity than a sports car, it's actually been incredibly surprising to drive. And I mean that both in the way that it accelerates and in the way that it steers and it grips. You know, and starting with that acceleration, you know, with 603 horsepower under the hood, it's not surprising that this thing is massively, massively fast. But, you know, it's a different thing to read those stats on paper than get on the road and floor it and get buried into your seat by a vehicle that shouldn't accelerate as fast as it does. It's genuinely surprising. Like, under your right foot is not an accelerator pedal. It's just a button that you can press and make all the other cars around you essentially go backwards. There's very, very few other vehicles on the road that you're going to encounter on a daily basis that could outperform this massive SUV despite its size, and it truly does feel supercar quick. Now, on to handling in that very same note, because again, when I got into this massive SUV, quickly noticed that the steering, again, it's pretty much dead. There isn't a whole lot going on. It's very light, even in your sportiest Sport Plus setting. It doesn't take too much effort to really drive it quickly. But the thing that surprised me the most is the amount of grip. Now, it does have a limited slip differential to give you, you know, as sporty of a drive as possible, but I was frankly shocked at how little understeer, how little body roll, you know, this SUV manages to just attack corners with such great speed. And I think, you know, that's mainly to do with the driving modes that this SUV has, because, you know, in a lot of cars you can put it in Sport, Sport Plus, and it doesn't really change the characteristics of a car. But in the GLE63, remember, you have your adaptive suspension, all of the powertrain elements get adjusted, they get a little sharper, a little more responsive. Now, while it is a great performer, obviously it isn't perfect. And I think, you know, it's time that we touch on some of those sort of on-road drawbacks that I've noticed over the last week or so. Again, for the most part, there isn't anything major here. I mean, you're paying six figures for a massive SUV, so you'd really expect most of its kinks to be ironed out. And for the most part, brand new cars these days are relatively problem-free. But if I had to sort of nitpick here, one thing that I was surprised at is the amount of road noise coming in through the cabin. Now, it isn't an issue with wind noise. I've been on the highway, did a ton of miles on the highway in this thing, and it was perfectly comfortable and quiet in terms of wind, but in terms of road noise, and I think that might have to do with the fact that, you know, we have optional 22-inch wheels with massive, massive tires on them, and I think that is the main culprit as to sort of where that noise is coming from. So you can have the GLE63 on slightly smaller wheels, but I will say that the issue isn't big enough to offset how good those 22-inch wheels look. Now, as my week with the GLE63 kind of comes to a close, I've really been sort of pondering this idea of, like, is this SUV worth $128,000? There's a lot of car you can get for $128,000, and for the most part, I'm gonna go ahead and say yes. I typically, you know, feel that some very, very expensive versions of standard models are not worth the price, because they sometimes feel like, you know, versions that have a little bit of extra tacked on top to sort of justify the extra price. But this GLE really does give you the sense that it is something different. That when you get in it, when you operate it, everything you touch, everything you use, the way the powertrain responds, it feels almost like an entirely different vehicle, just that it shares a similar shell to the standard GLE. In terms of aesthetics, you can really take or leave the coupe style. You can have this in a regular sort of SUV style or this coupe style. I'm gonna go with the coupe style in this particular model, but just everything in here feels as expensive. Like, when I think of that price tag, I imagine myself and see this. So there we have it, the 2021 Mercedes-AMG GLE63S. And I'm still impressed by how good of an all-rounder this performance SUV is. The speed is there, the handling is there, the interior materials, it's all there, really justifying that price tag. Now, when you're shopping at this price, you're not typically picking between this or your sports car. You're typically getting this and your sports car. But if you had to get just one, this wouldn't be a major compromise. Overall, I just remain incredibly impressed by it, and it's one of my favorite AMG models that I've ever tested, and that's about as big of a compliment as I can give it. So with that, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you again very soon.